Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Training Industry Leader Talk, moving beyond outdated metrics in L&D, sponsored by the Regis Company, CGS Immersive, Training Industry Courses, and Training Industry Research. So welcome, I am Liz, the Events Marketing Specialist here at Training Industry, and I'm thrilled to have you with us here today. Before we get started, though, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's program. And I already see you guys in the chat, so if you haven't done so, though, open up those chat windows and let us know where you are joining us from today. As I mentioned, I am broadcasting from cloudy Raleigh, North Carolina, and it is a pleasure to have you with us here today. Feel free to use this chat window to, chat with any comments and questions for our speakers throughout today's event. And all of our questions will be addressed at the end of this session, particularly during our Q&A section, but do not hesitate to plug those kind of questions throughout. Additionally, once the session ends, a brief survey will appear in your browser. Please take a moment to share your feedback on today's session and our speaker. And all of our sessions are being recorded and archived on trainingindustry.com, and you will receive a follow-up email from us with a link to the on-demand sessions for you to share with your team. Now, if this is your first Training Industry event, we would love to welcome you. We exist to make connections among learning and development professionals, and we offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D, like events like today's Leader Talk, as well as through our articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, our podcast, and more. We would also love to hear about what you've learned from today's session on social media, so please follow us on your favorite platform so we can continue the conversation. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our first speaker today. Dr. Tom Whelan is the Director of Corporate Research at Training Industry, where for the past decade, he has been researching learner, learning, and leader and market-level questions that affect modern organizations. And before joining us, he worked as an organizational consultant, designing and evaluating selection practices and training programs for the U.S. military and in industries such as pharmaceuticals and technology manufacturing. And Tom has also published in leading scientific journals and presented at international conferences, and he holds his PhD in industrial organizational psychology from North Carolina State University. And with that, Tom, take it away.
Thank you, Liz. And I hope everybody is having a good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're coming from, or good evening, as the case may be. All right, let me make sure the screen is sharing. It looks correct. All right. So the title of this first session for today is "What's Wrong with the Status Quo on Training Evaluation?" And if your kind of reflexive reaction is, I wasn't aware that something was wrong. I mean, it's not a dire, set of circumstances, but as we go through the talk, hopefully you'll agree with me that some of the things that we've been doing probably need to be updated, or some of it needs to be disposed of and replaced with something else. And that's kind of the theme of today's Leader Talk. So let's talk through the agenda of what we're gonna go through in the next 45 minutes. We're going to start by talking about the past models and what some of the problems with them are, and why we maybe should look for some different solutions. Then we're going to talk through what some of the barriers are to using metrics in today's organizations. Then, I promise it'll only be for a few minutes, we'll get a little philosophical and talk about what is effectiveness. Like, when we invoke this idea of training effectiveness, like, what do we actually mean? What are we really talking about? Then we'll give you what we think the answer is, which is the 543 plus model, which is built on International Standards Organization guidelines for learning and development metrics. It's a whole mouthful. We'll get to it, though. It's not as convoluted as I may have just made it sound. And then at the end, we'll hopefully have time for question and answer and general complaints if anybody has any. All right, so let's start with the first section that I hopefully you agree comedically titled "Arguing with Our Elders." And the reason I approach it like this is because I think why we have problems with the metrics that we use and the approaches to measurement that we're taking, why we have those problems is due in part to where we've been before, and kind of what was accepted as common wisdom or best practice, and how some of that has aged over time. So to start with, I mean, the history of I'm not going to go into a huge history lesson, but it is worth talking about kind of where all this stuff comes from and what the old ways of thinking are. I mean, everybody is more or less, hopefully, familiar with the Kirkpatrick model and the Phillips addition to the Kirkpatrick model. Originally, it was devised in 1960. Kirkpatrick published it in a book form in the mid 70s, and then Phillips came and made the fifth level in the late 90s. So the issue with this model is that there's really not any evidence that the levels matter or work in any sort of sequence. We might really like them to. We can cross our fingers all we want, but they're not really related. Just because you have what looks like good outcomes at one level doesn't actually port over to you're guaranteed to have good outcomes at a different level. And part of the issue is it focuses only on training outcomes, regardless of training context, which itself can be a bit of a problem. Further, it's not actually really that easy to measure in practice, despite its oversimplification of what we should measure. And it's also married to the point of view of the organization and leaders, not other stakeholders. So sort of who is, all these Kirkpatrick levels meant to serve? It's not necessarily the learner, it's not the learning leader, it's not line managers, it's serving whoever the people are at the top. And I haven't gotten there yet, but you'll notice I have on the slide ROI does us few favors. In my opinion, ROI in a lot of instances is deeply flawed. It's usually based on estimates and guesses, and it's, in my opinion, terrible as a dominant index of training. There are much more important things to look at with training rather than cost, or can we put a number on some sort of return that we got out of it. Little lesser known model that you may not have heard about, but is influential, at least in the academic space, is the Holton HRD evaluation model. It has 3 outcome levels, which is nice. Looks at learning, individual performance, organizational performance. The issue with it is it's a little bit overbuilt. Measuring everything in it is impossible, and some of what you would need to measure doesn't exist. There's not really a way to get at it. And Holton tried to update it in 2005. Conceptually, it's great, but it didn't help a ton making it any easier. And one of the issues with it, same as with the Kirkpatrick model, is there's no feedback loops in it at all. So it has no concept of time. And then third, another one that is popular is the Brinkerhoff model. It sounds good, like the success case stuff. It sounds nice, but it requires a lot of judgment calls about what's important and what's not. And the 6-stage model that Brinkerhoff suggests is basically Kirkpatrick plus plus. It's Kirkpatrick levels with 2 more things added onto it. And in my opinion, a lot of the issue is we need to do away with levels entirely. Maybe it was good in the 60s and 70s and 80s, but it's not really how modern business works. It's not how modern training and learning occurs. So kind of to me skewering all the old models, what we're looking at here is 3 years worth of data on what organizations are doing to assess the impact of learning. And as you can see, there's some swings, but it really hasn't changed over time. And that's part of the issue. What most organizations are collecting is learner feedback, which, great, you're collecting something, but that's the only thing that crests 50%. So the other half of organizations are not collecting most of this stuff. Second place is business impact measures. However that might be conceptualized, and then return on expectations and return on investment. The point that I want to make here is basically third from the bottom, Kirkpatrick levels. That's supposedly the gold standard for training evaluation. 11% and from data we're in February, so it's only a month. 11% of organizations are trying to chase down Kirkpatrick levels. So this thing that we've held up as the gold standard most people aren't adhering to this standard. They're collecting a couple things and basically, just kind of wishing and hoping that it gives them all the answers that they need. And it's not that learning leaders aren't aware of this. A survey we did in Q4 last year, kind of, trying to get a forward look on where organizations are going. One of the things that we asked them was, what's your biggest challenge going into 2026? And so I've pulled out some quotes that speak to this exact challenge of measurement and metrics. You can see the first one on there. The person's main challenge is how do I link training's value to anything that anybody else cares about? Like I can measure stuff, but how do I make it meaningful? Other people are just saying we just have to be able to measure impact on performance. How can we do that better? Other companies might identify something else as their biggest challenge, but then note that we need to improve our metrics so we can show that anything we're doing works or has an effect. And here this I guess there's two more, but this one it's how do you demonstrate measurable impact on performance when you have limited time and resources? So there's other challenges baked in here, but evaluation is a theme. And then the last one, actually measuring return on investment, which I already said is problematic at best. And I say that because I think how it frames what training is supposed to do or what its quote unquote worth is supposed to be is not always a financial metric. And if that's always the yardstick that we're looking at, that's how stakeholders are going to want to talk about it, because we're not really giving them much else. Now, part of the problem with this is, what data do most learning leaders just have access to inside their organizations? And so this is another recent survey that I pulled this from. And as you can see, only two things are collected by more than 50% of organizations. So they, little less than 2/3. They have some quizzes or assessments that are taken as part of a training, and a little better than half have completion rate data. But from there, it starts to fall off a cliff. So and for what it's worth, too, the average number of metrics that were collected, the average was about 5. So again, it's not that people aren't doing anything, but what they're doing is disjointed. It's based on maybe some past beliefs on, we have to measure, did learners like it, and then did they learn anything? And if those two things are good, then we'll get transfer. It's like that. It's been shown repeatedly that all that stuff doesn't have to play together like we would wish it would. And the problem is we end up chasing wild geese. So without good, sound evaluation, we have no idea whether the behavior that employees exhibit after training is due to the design of the job, something that the business is doing, the strategic approaches that might be taken to certain products or services, decisions that somebody made, whether it's leadership or employees or what the competitors are doing. Could be just dumb luck that something seemed like it worked. Could be random external events that are well beyond what the organization has control of that are affecting employee behavior. Could also be training. Could be a combination of the above or something else that's not on this list. So just because we can measure stuff and we want to connect a dot and make things look linear, that's no assurance that that's ever actually gonna happen. So I think that brings us to an uncomfortable question. Because when it boils down to it, we're not really great at this, and we're not really getting better over time either. I mean, that graph from a few slides back showed that the measurement strategy, has not really shifted all that dramatically in the past 3 years. And so the question is a failure to see desired learning outcomes due to training that didn't work, or is it just because we measured that training poorly? Right? And the reason that we're measuring things poorly is because in many instances, we're starting from outdated assumptions. And not just about how to measure stuff, but more or less about everything. We have bad assumptions that disrupt our visibility into skills, cause struggles to measure what actually matters, and then we wonder why we can't connect training to real performance or any sort of tangible business impact, right? Because, as it stands now, 21st century, employee training is a much more robust concept than it used to be. It's a much more robust activity than it used to be, and it's utterly soaked in technologies that didn't exist before, right? So assuming we can break all of this complexity down to 4 levels or 6 stages or whatever it is a bit of a fool's errand. Like, we can hold up certain outcomes like ROI is important, but we often, I feel like, find ourselves doing that without any respect to whether it really matters or not, whether that's the outcomes that are meaningful, whether that is moving the needles that we want to move. So in my opinion, training isn't necessarily broken. We don't think our ideas about our evaluation are broken, but that's precisely the problem. They're inflexible. We have to break our pattern of thinking about how we even approach measurement. Now, that said, it's not easy, so let's talk about some of the modern barriers to metrics. Like, what causes the existing concepts about training evaluation to crumble? So let's try to talk about why it doesn't work anymore. Because again, not that they're bad ideas in their own right, but it's in this day and age, it's like willingly using an old map that has roads that don't exist anymore. And just totally ignoring that there's an app for that now. Like, there's way more technologies that can help us with this. We don't have to, well, what about level 4 outcomes? It's like, we don't need the levels. Like, what's important? And also, before I just, bag on a whole bunch of companies, it's not for lack of trying, right? It's not that organizations don't care or aren't making good faith attempts. So here's some insights from training industry data over the past year or two. Evaluating the effectiveness of onboarding, like we did a piece on onboarding. Just, is it good or not, was the top challenge from that learning leaders identified when trying to stand up onboarding or induction training. When people are shopping for technology solutions, reporting and analytics is one of the top features that they're interested in or they're looking for. And when people have extra budget, I mean, that doesn't happen to many of us, but at least from data that we've collected, when people have extra budget, improving measurement is one of the top reinvestment areas that they reallocate those funds to. So it's not that people aren't trying or we're fighting some sort of uphill battle, against like nobody wants to invest in this or nobody seems to care. Again, it's just that what we're trying to do is out of date. Like, we're showing up to calculus class with a slide rule and an abacus and going, I got the latest and greatest. And the thing is, this has been a problem. I mean, from a couple charts ago, it's been a problem for the last 3 years. Our strategies haven't changed. But here we're looking at some of the top challenges in L&D over the past decade. I've collected data on this for 10 years. Evaluation is number 1. So in all this time, the challenge that keeps cropping up for training is just how do I measure this? How do I prove that this is any good? And another significant barrier is we're not sure what stakeholders need all the time. So in effect, we don't know what we're doing all the time. We don't know the target that we're aiming at. 24%, according to this, 24% of us we have a pretty good thumb on what we think stakeholders want. But for the rest of us, it's a continuum. Like, fairly confident you can still make some missteps. So part of the problem I think that we have with measurement is we're relying on, well, what does Kirkpatrick prescribe that we do, or what does the Brinkerhoff strategy prescribe that we do, rather than going, no, let's get laser focused on what stakeholders need to know or what they need to make decisions about what's going on with employee learning, and then aim at that. So that brings us to a poll. I was interested to get everybody that's on the session today your feedback on where do you feel your measurement and evaluation approach is the weakest. So is it A, just getting information, having data points so you can answer questions when they get posed? Is it monitoring what's going on? So, are you fighting with, like, how do we establish benchmarks? Are you a little bit up the chain? And maybe you're, where you think you're weakest, like you got some benchmarks and stuff like that. but can you really dive in on effectiveness and efficiency? Is it D, management? So more or less like you're doing full strategic planning with your data. That's where you feel like you need to get better. Or are you one of the like the rare ducks that none of this is particularly a problem for you? You're more or less okay. All right, I ran my mouth for a little bit. I think Liz closed the
Yes, the
closed the
results are
poll.
live.
Thank you. All right, so according to this, 23% said just getting information is an issue. 14 said monitoring, so setting up stuff with the benchmarks. That's right. 50% said evaluation, and 13% said management. So to be, and every time I ask this, everybody always has different answers. So the fact that I think of all the people that are on this session, people are grappling with different problems, I think illustrates some of what I'm saying. Like we're not all stuck at one point. There's a lot of different hurdles potentially that we have to get over. And again, some of that is our measurement strategies are incomplete. When I asked a similar question in a survey, to basically like what sort of information are you using to make decisions and try to improve training, we got a similar sort of breakdown. That a lot of people are trying to get a handle on efficiency and effectiveness, do more of an in-depth analysis, but just as or not just as many, but a significant number of people are also struggling with just how do I answer simple questions, right? Like so in a sense, like you might look at the percentages on the screen and be like, well, those aren't that low, and no, they're not. But the fact that they're not higher is the problem, right? Like so the last one on the chart, using is basically the strategic planning thing, using a suite of metrics to drive training improvements. 60% of organizations can't sniff that. Like they would like to get there perhaps, but they're not there, and also just because people are collecting some of this or aspiring to this doesn't necessarily mean they're having success with it or doing it particularly well. So that brings, I'm almost trying to watch my time. That brings me to what I feel like is the really ugly part of talking about evaluation, and it's to kind of acknowledge and just sit in the discomfort that organizations lack visibility into what's going on with skills. They have a lot of struggles to measure what matters, and it's difficult to connect training to performance or business impact. And when you ask organizations basically like what is the challenge, like why would you go to market for an assessment or evaluation solution, or what is it you're trying to do, what's the problem you're trying to solve, it's never one thing. Like it could be they have just a lack of clear actionable measurement of what the impacts are. Maybe they're trying to solve for poor engagement or motivation. Their knowledge retention metrics that they have don't look all that great. Maybe the assessment tools they have are disconnected, or they're just ineffective because they're not up to date. Maybe it's a matter of the decision making that people are attempting to wrangle with. For either talent decisions or leadership development decisions, they don't have enough sound data to make those decisions. Scaling is its own problem. There's cultural issues that affect evaluation, communication issues, soft skill gaps, and some of it may or may not be due to weak internal L&D capacity. It could be organizations are trying to transition to a more modern approach, and it's just making people's eyes twitch, or just in general they have an unclear learning strategy, stakeholders aren't aligned, there's not a roadmap to where training is trying to take the organization. But it all comes from this lack of visibility, right? So everything else, whether it's something with a platform, engagement, whatever, is a downstream effect of the lack of insight that we have into learning and to whether our learning is any good. And so I think that brings us to the question, well, what is good learning? What is good training? What does effectiveness actually mean? And I found this quote. I want to say like a year ago, but it stuck with me because I mean, partially I thought it was hilarious. A little bit of a backstory though to explain why I think it's funny. I'm not a particularly big fan of MotoGP racing, which is motorcycle racing for anybody that's not familiar. But this Ducati team had been doing great, like really good, and then stuff started to backslide, and then they panicked. They tried a bunch of different stuff, and then we're looking at their data to see are the metrics moving. When that didn't work, they try something else and see, okay, did the numbers move now? What they never really did is go back and go, when it worked before, what were we doing? Or when we had success, let's explain our success rather than try to diagnose why something failed. Right? And what a lot of businesses, I feel, tend to do, as the Ducati team did, is ride high on success until things start to slip. And then they make a lot of changes that maybe seem logical on the surface in the hope that something reverses their fortunes. But they don't really have any avenues to understand what worked, maybe why it worked, and what it did or didn't fix of the problems that they have. So I think that this brings us to kind of a different way of trying to think about evaluation data. Like, we can't look at data only as a diagnostic tool. Yes, it is that, but it can do a lot more, right? And we artificially limit ourselves if we're only seeing our numbers as a way to tell us where the problems live, right? We wind up kind of being defeatist about our metrics, and we feel like we might be at their mercy to tell us where we failed, rather than approaching evaluation as something to harness to serve our goals. So we have the power, the data doesn't have the power. And now it'll make sense in a few minutes why I'm referencing these ISO standards. But the International Standards Organization, they put out a guideline for evaluating training in 2023. So it's relatively new in the grand scheme of things. But it's thoroughly modern and tries to address, I think, the issues and maybe questions that today's organizations have about how to approach a measurement and how to communicate it. So the ISO defines effectiveness as a metric of quality. So it's just how good was the program. So these metrics can help uncover issues with learning design, issues with the content, issues with the application of that content. And a program is not considered effective if people react poorly to it, or if they don't learn a lot, or they fail to apply what they've learned. Now, this isn't the only category of metrics in these ISO standards. And ROI counts as an effectiveness metric. But it is its own category of looking at things. But it's not the only category. There's also efficiency metrics. So that's things like completion rates, costs, utilization rates. There's also outcome metrics. So that's, anytime you can tie a number to a business goal or some sort of desired end state. Right? So effectiveness is just one way to collect data and look at the worth and the value of the learning that we're standing up. So kind of what is effectiveness? I mean, like, yes, it's okay, training seemed good, but I think it's also dependent on why are we measuring stuff? Is it to justify the investment? Is it to make better decisions? Is it to encourage stakeholder accountability and stakeholder interest? Maybe, find the unlucky soul that wants to be a champion of L&D. Is it to demonstrate that we're being financially responsible with the budget that we have for training? Are we just straight up trying to improve the learning quality? Are we encouraging involvement and participation in learning? So why are we measuring training at all? Could be one of these things, could be a combination of these things, could be all these things, right? And for companies that say, but we do look at the data to understand why we're doing well, are we really? Like, what are you trying to get out of that analysis? Are you focused on winning, or are you focused on learning and improvement, right? Because the former is not at all the same as the latter, right? And the approach that we're taking directs our attention to different data, to different outcomes, and it can narrow the scope of what's deemed important in the data. Right? So like what defines effectiveness, the how good was the program, depends on what training is trying to accomplish. And, like what data we collect on or not. And to me, the key part, who we're telling the story of effectiveness to, right? Because in effect, effectiveness doesn't have a universal definition, and neither is it supposed to. To insist on one usually leads to the definition getting oversimplified, and we just wallpaper over all sorts of nuance, which is what past measurement frameworks usually have done as well. Again, the answer to what is effectiveness, unfortunately, is it depends. How does the organization want to define effectiveness? How, for this particular learning initiative, what does effectiveness mean? It doesn't have to mean one thing. There doesn't have to be one yardstick that we measure all training that we put out there. So that brings us to what we feel like the answer is for some of these measurement woes, which is the 543 plus model. And again, this is built on those ISO standards and mushes it together with some other stuff. But the main, I think, shift in thinking is that metrics don't exist in a vacuum. Liz, was there a question?
There was. I was about to interrupt you. Somebody was asking where they can find the sources for the ISO standards for training, as you were kind of talking about it. So yeah, where is that source, if you know by chance?
Good question. So the like where the standards come from or where they can find them?
Yeah, where can they find the source for the iOS or ISO? Man, I really
ISO.
want to put those standards. Yes.
So if you just look up ISO 30437, that will get you directly to the standards document that they made. Very good document, very comprehensive, very visually, let's say visually upsetting to look at. Like think of basically like a school term paper where it's all like single space text. There's no pictures. There's no colors. So it's very dry as a read, but very comprehensive. Training industry has, and they'll be. We'll show it on the screen at the end of this. We have a few ebooks that build on this, that explain both the ISO standards themselves as well as kind of our approach, this 543 thing. In separate ebooks. So there's two places. You can find our ebook, or you can go directly to the ISO standards. Hopefully that answered the question. But to get back to this, metrics don't exist in a vacuum. And the main point, this is one of the things I think is very worthwhile about these ISO metrics, is they sort of redirect attention to this. Evaluation isn't all about numbers. It's about communication, right? So the story of training isn't received by everyone as the same story. Different stakeholders have different interests. They have different questions. They want different answers of what's going on with training. So just taking one blocky Kirkpatrick approach to looking at everything isn't going to tell all of those stories, right? And I think this is the issue. We willfully confuse what do I measure, what's important to measure, with who cares. And I don't mean like who cares sort of like in a nobody cares hypothetical sense, but like literally, who cares? Who are we trying to talk to? Who's the person that cares about the metrics that we're measuring? Is it only people in the C-suite or the CLO or the head of learning, like what metrics they need to know? But what about the metrics that the line managers need to know, or training managers need to know, or the learners themselves need to know? And the issue with that too is I think it kind of the fulcrum of it rather is that measurement without a reference produces just meaningless numbers. So what is the context for this training? Who are you talking to? If you don't have a context for what you're explaining, you're just throwing numbers at people. Like, how good was the training? 46%. Right? If you don't like that number, how does 63 sound? Like it's numbers. Like they're not tied to anything, because the context matters a lot. And I know, because we get asked frequently, like, are there external benchmarks for this or that? A lot of external benchmarks are context agnostic, so they're removed from what was happening with the learning, who are the learners, when were they trying to take the training, what form was the training, like what did managers reinforce, what are you trying to get out on the back end, what are people aware of the point of the training is, maybe what are they not aware of, how does that affect their behavior, so it's this tangled mess of stuff that if we ignore and we just go, ooh, I had good level 2 outcomes, then okay, yeah, hooray, we had good level 2 outcomes, but what do you do with that? What does that mean? Who do you tell that to? And how do you tell it to them? So in these ISO standards, there are 5 types of stakeholders that they identify. And so to us, and we add 1 or 2 just for fun, but to us, these are the main people that, like, when we're telling the story of training, this is who we're talking to. So it's senior leaders, it's the group or team leader, that, like, line managers that manage the employees, it's the head of learning, it's the training manager, those that are working with the training, and the learner themselves, right? You could also add subject matter experts to some extent, and vendors to the extent that it applies to this list as well. But the point of identifying that there's these different stakeholders is acknowledging that they don't all want the same information, they don't all want to hear the same story. What you have to tell them from maybe this big volume of information that you've collected, they don't want to hear all of it. So what are the parts that are relevant to them? What are the parts that will help them do their job better? What are the things that will give them a sense of maybe where they're at, where the company is at, where training is at? Like, how do you tell the story of effectiveness to each of these stakeholders? Because probably how you're going to frame it to a senior leader is going to be, I was going to say less honest than how you frame it to a head of learning, but whatever. How you frame it to a senior leader, like, you can't talk the same way to them about what's going on with training as you talk to learners or you talk to training managers. So you more or less have to tailor the message, not tailor the evaluation approach, but tailor the message to who the audience is. Now, a little bit more about these ISO standards. They cover all forms of learning, both formal and informal. But again, like, I've called it a guide because it's not necessarily a compliance checklist that they put out. It's intended to be a starting point to help people to better measurement and better benchmarking. It also, in case anybody's feathers are ruffled by me disparaging poor Donald Kirkpatrick, it absorbs previous measurement practices. So like if somebody really needs to hold on to their Kirkpatrick blanket, it's still in these ISO standards. It is not the star of the show, but it appears. They delineate where it is. Now here's the part where everybody coughs a little bit. For large organizations, there's 52 different recommended metrics in these standards. And it's just recommended. But that's kind of the point. There are so many different things to measure, so many different ways you can get information. Are we actually, because again, from earlier, the average is 5. So if there's 52 that are recommended, we have some other things that we could add, to our arsenal of what gets measured. For smaller organizations, they only recommend 19. Still far above the 5 that's the average, but it's only 19. Now, Here's I think the trick to this. Yes, it's 19, but not all of those metrics cross consumers or cross all the different stakeholder audiences. Only 8 of those metrics of the 19 are recommended for CEOs, 13 are recommended for the head of learning, and 7 are recommended for training managers. So you're not communicating the same stuff to everybody. You might be telling the same story or the same narrative, but how you're getting there is a little bit different. So that I think brings us to some questions to ask about training value. That obviously dovetails into the model that we're going to talk about for a minute. So how do we know when stakeholders want to know things and who those stakeholders are? Not what level are we measuring. Who do we need to talk to, and when are we going to have the stuff to communicate to them? How do we know what kinds of questions we can even ask of the data that we have, or what types of questions we could possibly ask about what's going on with training? And also, how do we know what kind of answers we can get? What can we actually provide people with? How can we answer some of the questions that get posed? And this will be a little bit of an eye test. but this is our framework for how this all works. It looks complicated, but it's not. One of the assumptions of it, though, is that evaluation is cyclical. So if you look at the bottom row, there's always, if you have an assessment of need, it could be some sort of trigger, it could be, the learners themselves triggering it. Then you get into formative assessment. How are things going? So that's as training is going on. So are people, enrolling? How do they feel about it? How do like quiz or learning outcomes look in the training? Then you get them out onto the job and you start to do summative assessment and answer some of those things with outcomes. So are you connecting training to business impact? And I think maybe it's not obvious to see, but it kind of, I think, gives a bit of a roadmap to like when can we communicate some of these things to stakeholders. Like you can't communicate outcome information to say like a CLO or people in the C-suite if you're still at the beginning of training. You don't have those metrics available yet. And every time you finish one of these cycles, the inputs go back into the next needs assessment. Next time there's a trigger for training, or next time learners say, hey, we need to know this, or from top down, it's mandated, hey, we all need to learn whatever this skill is. So I was going to say I'm trying not to run over. So I quickly wanted to give you some guidelines on I think what we feel makes for good metrics. So first is that they can be multi-level. So just look directly rather than infer or guess. Like if you want to know what's going on with learners, you ask learners. You want to know what's going on at the team level, don't just add all the learner stuff together and go, we're calling this team level. Ask people about the team level. So focus the measurement on the level that you're trying to ask the question about. Another thing with metrics is they need to actually exist someplace. Either we have to make them, or in some cases, they can exist somewhere else. Doesn't have to be inside L&D. And yeah, there's sometimes access problems, but can you buy somebody a coffee and become the friend and get access to some data? But whatever we use, it can't be hypothetical. Next thing is they have to be triangulated. Like if we have hard outcomes, great, but do we also have ratings? Can we look at a particular outcome of interest, or how engaged are people? How much do they like the training? Can we use a few different ways of getting an answer to that one question? The next is that they're repeatable. Effort matters a lot. There's a cost to collecting data. You can create your own monster if you think we're going to set up this great measurement framework, and it just takes an immense amount of effort and energy to do it once, much less have it be something that you can run over and over again. Next is the metrics need to be important. It seems easy, but the easy wins aren't always the important ones. Sometimes the question you have to answer is the most eye-watering question that somebody could ask, and will involve data work that makes your stomach turn a little bit. But if it's worth it, that's worth it to chase down, rather than just leaning on, well, I can give you this and this and that, and we can guess from there. And then the last one has to be constant. Again, this idea of evaluation needs to involve this idea of time. Snapshots are useful, but trends are actionable. So how do we need to change? Again, like evaluation doesn't need levels, it needs cohesive narratives. And the audience for the metrics that we have shapes what they mean. And the objectives of what we're going after matter a lot. The context matters a lot to how we approach measurement. All right, I'm almost out of time. So let's go through some quick takeaways about metrics. And you'll hear more approaches in the sessions that follow. But what's important is that we're willing to change our approach rather than cling to the idea that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Because stuff is very, very broke, and it needs fixing. So here's some takeaways. What the majority of organizations are doing falls woefully short of even what we think is the gold standard. So the idea that it's what was before is fine. It's like, okay, if it was, people still aren't doing it. And I think part of it is those past models miss the mark, and we end up focusing our attention on the wrong things. So whatever we want to define as effectiveness, we need a local definition for that. Like, it can change from department to department, from training initiative to training initiative. It's fine. And also, I think the biggest takeaway is the stakeholder determines the messaging on evaluation. All right, real quick for further reading, and this deck will be available as well. For further reading, here's links to the two ebooks that Training Industry has on this. And I also want to plug that if you're interested in the 543 model, at the end of March, we're going to have a session that goes a lot deeper into this whole framework and how it can help with your measurement. And with that, I think on time, I ran a little long. I think I ruined any chance of Q&A. But please send questions. I will, we will try to get back to you.
Yes, you will, because
that,
the list is long.
Thank you, everybody.
The list is long of questions, so your inbox will be full after this. But thank you so much for this session. It was a great one. There was a lot of great conversations in the chat, so I definitely want to keep the energy going for our next couple of sessions. So thank you so much, Tom, for kicking us off. We will be taking about a 15 to 14 minute break. Up next, we have Mike, Donald, and David for their session sponsored by the Regis Company, Practice, Evidence, and the Future of Learning Management. So in just a moment, I'm going to end this session. You can join our next session by returning to that event lobby and going to the session tab. I hope you all stick around for our next session, which will begin at the top of the hour. I will see you all then. Bye, everybody.